I've always been the responsible one, the dutiful daughter. My parents raised me to put family first, always, and that's what I've done, without question. I'm not saying I've never had my own dreams or that I've been completely selfless, but when it came to my family, I just knew I had to be there. I don't know if it was because I was the firstborn or if it was just how I was wired, but I was the one who paid the bills, managed the medical expenses, and kept everything running smoothly. My younger sister? She lived in another state, building her own life. My cousin? She barely acknowledged our parents except for the occasional birthday call. I always thought it was strange, but I never gave it too much thought. It never occurred to me that one day, the weight of everything I was doing would come crashing down on me. I was 32 when it really hit me how much I'd been carrying. I'd been paying my parents' mortgage, their utilities, their groceries for months, no questions asked. It wasn't anything they forced on me. I didn't resent it, not really. They'd done their part when I was a child. But it wasn't just a simple exchange. It was part of a quiet expectation. No one ever asked for anything, but somehow I always knew they needed it. So I took it upon myself to step in. I'd call them every day, sometimes more than once, to check in. I wasn't a helicopter daughter. It wasn't like I was worrying myself sick about them. I just knew they weren't great with money. They didn't ask for help, but I saw the struggle. And I couldn't just stand by and let them get behind on bills or face the threat of losing their home. It was just easier to make sure they were comfortable, to make sure they never had to worry. And then there was my aunt. Oh, my aunt! On the surface, she was warm and charming, always with a smile on her face and a helpful suggestion. She wasn't a bad person, at least. I didn't think so at first. But over the years, I'd started to notice little things. She had a way of getting under my parents' skin, always in that subtle, coaxing way. It was never overt manipulation, just a suggestion here and a comment there about how much better her daughter was at everything. The comparisons between me and my cousin were almost casual, like a whispered reminder that I should do better, try harder, be more like her golden child. I didn't let it bother me too much. After all, I wasn't competing for my parents' approval, was I? But there were moments when my aunt's words felt sharper than I wanted to admit. There were the family holidays where her daughter would be lavished with praise for being the smart one, the successful one. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the background, handling the logistics, keeping the family together while my cousin waltzed through life with hardly a care. It wasn't like I was a total stranger to the concept of favoritism. After all, my cousin was the firstborn granddaughter. But what I didn't realize at the time was how deep the favoritism ran. It wasn't just subtle comparisons, it was the foundation of everything my parents had been doing behind my back. And I was so caught up in my daily routine of being the one who did it all that I never noticed. We would all gather for dinners at my parents' house. Every time, my aunt would drop in, always with a flourish, as if she had the most important thing to say. It was almost like an unspoken competition between her and my parents, a game I didn't even know I was playing. It was all so charming at first. I could see how they fed into her praise. They loved the idea of her daughter being the perfect child. She had the career, the house, the husband. I never begrudged her any of that. It was just the way my parents would nod approvingly, so easily entranced by her stories. My cousin never had to ask for help. She didn't need to. I guess that's where I began to feel the first cracks in the facade. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the praise. It was the sense that I was the invisible one, the one who was always there, always taking care of things, but never receiving the same acknowledgement. Not in the way my cousin did, not in the way she was treated. It wasn't until I started paying closer attention that things really started to shift. My aunt had a way of making me feel like I was always a step behind, like I could never do enough. And every time I visited, there was this quiet whisper of her voice, floating over the dinner table, talking about how her daughter was so dedicated to her family, how much she did for her parents. I should have seen the signs, but I didn't. Instead, I kept my head down, did what I always did, provided for them, and kept my mouth shut. But deep down, I could feel a storm brewing. I didn't know it yet, but my world was about to change. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything started unraveling. I had just finished a meeting at work, the kind that dragged on longer than expected, and was rushing out to grab a coffee. My phone buzzed as I walked down the hallway, and I saw that it was a message from my mom. "Can you come by later? We need to talk about something important." I wasn't sure why, but a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. It wasn't like my parents to be cryptic. I quickly replied, "Sure, I'll come by after work." I walked into my parents' house that evening, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. The house smelled like my mom's cooking, something hearty with a touch of garlic, the way it always did when she was trying to comfort herself. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I noticed my aunt sitting on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look up immediately, but I could feel her eyes on me, like she was waiting for me to make the first move. It wasn't unusual for her to be here. She stopped by often, but something about tonight felt different. "Hey, sweetheart," my mom greeted me, her voice sounding softer than usual. My dad was sitting in his usual chair, a slight frown on his face, his gaze focused on something distant. My aunt didn't say a word, just smiled that perfect smile of hers, the one she knew always made her seem like the picture of warmth and sincerity. I sat down, trying to shake off the odd tension in the room. "We just wanted to talk to you about something important," my dad finally said. He seemed almost nervous, like he was about to break some bad news. My mom's eyes were searching mine, as if she was trying to gauge my reaction. My aunt just sat there, looking at me with a tilt of her head, like she was a passive observer. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep the nerves out of my voice. I glanced between my parents and my aunt, feeling a strange unease creeping up. "Well," my dad began, rubbing his hands together nervously, "your mom and I have been talking, and we've made some decisions about the future." He looked at my mom as if seeking her approval to continue. "Your aunt and I have been discussing it as well," my mom added, her voice tight. "We've decided that we're going to make some changes to the will." I blinked. The will? We hadn't talked about the will in years, and honestly, it was something I'd never really thought about much. I assumed that when the time came, we'd handle it like every other family, fairly, and without too much drama. But that's not how it went down. Not at all. "We've decided to leave everything to your cousin," my mom said, her eyes avoiding mine as she spoke. "She's been the one who's really been there for us. She's done so much, and it's only right that she takes over." I froze. My heart stopped for a moment, and everything around me became blurry. I didn't even know what to say. I could feel the blood draining from my face as the words settled in. "Wait, what?" I finally managed to get out, my voice hoarse. "You're leaving everything to her? But I've been taking care of everything. I've been paying your bills, making sure you're comfortable, handling your day-to-day expenses for months." My hands shook, and I tried to steady myself, but the shock was too much. "How could you do this? Why would you—" My aunt interrupted, her voice smooth and practiced, like she was in the middle of delivering some pre-rehearsed speech. "It's not that we don't appreciate everything you've done, sweetheart, but your cousin has been the one who's truly supported us in her own way. She's been so dedicated to your mother and father, especially when they needed someone to rely on. She's made a real impact on their lives." I could barely comprehend her words. It felt like a punch to the gut. I had been the one supporting them financially for months, not her. My cousin? She barely even picked up the phone. I was the one who showed up, the one who helped with the groceries, who paid for the repairs, who made sure their utilities were on. But now, suddenly, it was my cousin who had been there for them all along? I turned to my parents, desperately searching their faces for any sign of guilt, of understanding, but all I saw were their eyes lowered, their bodies stiff. The weight of what they were saying hung in the air like a fog I couldn't escape. "I can't believe this," I whispered, my voice trembling. You're giving everything to her. You don't even realize how much I've done for you, for years." My dad finally spoke up, his tone apologetic but firm. "Sweetheart, we've just made our decision. It's for the best." "For the best?" I could barely get the words out. "What about me? What about all the sacrifices I've made, all the money I've spent to keep this house running? I've been the one doing everything." My aunt leaned forward then, a small, knowing smile on her face. "You've done a lot, dear, but sometimes it's about more than just money, isn't it? It's about loyalty and being there when it counts. Your cousin has been more than just a financial support. She's been a true source of strength." The words hit me like a slap across the face. I wanted to scream, to lash out at her, but I knew it would only make things worse. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. How could they do this to me? To the person who had sacrificed her own peace of mind, her time, and so much more for them. I stood up abruptly, shaking my head in disbelief. "I can't believe this. I'm done." I turned and walked out of the room without another word, leaving behind a silence that felt colder than the night air outside. I didn't talk to my parents for days after that conversation. The shock was too much to process. It wasn't just that they'd decided to leave everything to my cousin, it was the way they'd justified it, how they'd made it sound like my years of sacrifice, my dedication, and all the quiet ways I'd kept the family afloat meant nothing. They had been so sure of their decision, so convinced that it was for the best. And I had been left in the cold, feeling more like a stranger than a daughter. I tried to move on, I really did, but every time I checked my bank account and saw the automatic payments I was making for their bills, utilities, groceries, even some of their medical costs, I was reminded of how much I had given, how much I'd sacrificed for their comfort, while my cousin lived her life with hardly a thought for them. She had her own family, her own house, her own life, and yet, somehow, she was the one who had earned the inheritance. Loyalty. That was the word my aunt used over and over again. But loyalty? Loyalty wasn't paying for someone's electric bill every month, taking them to doctor's appointments, or making sure they didn't have to worry about anything. That wasn't loyalty. That was responsibility. I stopped the payments. Cold turkey. I didn't even tell them. I just stopped. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I'd been supporting them for so long, it was like a reflex. But when I thought about how they had dismissed everything I'd done, how they had handed everything over to my cousin without so much as a second thought, I knew it was time to make them feel the consequences. The first few days after I stopped were the hardest. My mom called me, asking why I hadn't transferred money for the bills that week. "Honey, is everything okay? We're a little behind on the utility bill. Could you help us out?" I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to explain myself, to make her understand how much this hurt, but I knew she wouldn't get it, not yet. "Mom," I finally said, my voice tight, "I can't help you anymore." "Why?" she asked, clearly confused. "You've always helped us. Why are you suddenly—" "I can't," I interrupted, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You and Dad made your choice. You're giving everything to her, and I'm done." I didn't even say my cousin's name. Saying it felt like a betrayal of my own sense of self-respect. There was silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. I could practically feel her scrambling for something to say, some way to make it better. "Honey, I don't understand," she finally said, her voice wavering. "This isn't what we meant. We didn't mean to hurt you." "Well, you did," I snapped, more sharply than I intended. "You hurt me by thinking I was just some cash machine to pay your bills, to take care of everything, while you sit back and hand everything over to her." The words felt like daggers in my mouth, but they needed to be said. They needed to hear it. "I never asked for this," I continued. "I've been there for you because I love you, but you don't even see me. You don't even see the sacrifices I've made. You're choosing her, and I'm done." There was another long pause before she spoke again. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I'm done." I hung up before she could respond. For the next few days, I avoided their calls. I was heartbroken, but I was also so angry I couldn't even look at them. It wasn't just my parents who had hurt me, it was my aunt, too. I'd always known she was manipulative in her own way, but this felt like a betrayal on a level I hadn't anticipated. She'd wormed her way into my parents' lives, made them feel like they owed her something, and in doing so, she'd taken everything from me without lifting a finger. I didn't know how my parents had gotten to the point where they were listening to her more than to me, where they saw her as the loyal child. But I was starting to see the picture more clearly. She had always known how to play the game. My aunt was the one who kept up appearances, who told my parents exactly what they wanted to hear, who made them feel needed in all the right ways. She had always been the golden child in their eyes, just with a much more polished exterior than me. Meanwhile, I had been the practical one, the one who did the work, who took care of everything. But now, it seemed like being the perfect child, the one who charmed them, who made them feel special, was enough to win everything. A week later, my parents sent me a text. It was from both of them. "We need to talk. Please come over. This has gone too far." I'd been expecting something like that. I'd been waiting for them to finally acknowledge how I felt, to see how much pain I was in. But I didn't want to rush over there like I always had. I didn't want to go running back just because they were upset. This wasn't just about me being mad, it was about respect. But I went anyway. When I walked in the door, my dad was sitting in his chair, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. My mom was pacing in the kitchen, wringing her hands, trying to think of what to say. My aunt was nowhere in sight, which, in a way, only added to the tension. "Sit down," my dad finally said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I said, crossing my arms, waiting for the apology I knew wasn't going to come. "I just don't understand," my mom began, shaking her head. "We thought you would be happy for your cousin. She's been so good to us over the years. You should be proud of what she's done." "Proud?" The words felt like a slap. My voice cracked as I spoke. "Proud? You want me to be proud of the fact that you're leaving everything to her? The same cousin who hasn't lifted a finger to help you, to support you in any way?" "Your aunt?" "Don't," I interrupted, cutting her off before she could try to justify my cousin's complete lack of effort. "This isn't about her. It's about you and Dad deciding I wasn't enough, despite everything I've done. You think she's the one who deserves it, but you've never even seen me. You've never seen the way I've carried this family for years. This is your loyalty?" My dad opened his mouth as if to respond, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses. "I'm done," I said, my voice low and final, "and I'm not coming back until you understand why." They both fell silent, and this time it was their silence that echoed the loudest. The days after that conversation felt like a blur. My parents kept trying to reach me, but I didn't answer their calls. I wasn't doing it out of spite anymore. I was doing it because I needed space. I needed them to feel the weight of what they'd done. I wanted them to understand the depth of the hurt they'd caused me. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about love, about not being seen even when I had given everything. I went about my daily life. I went to work. I saw my friends, but there was an ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I felt betrayed. It wasn't just the inheritance. It was the years of sacrifice and effort that had been dismissed in a single, casual conversation. All the years of being the one who always stepped up when they needed help, only to be told that I wasn't enough. And then, one day, I found something that changed everything. I was going through some old family papers, clearing out the attic for a long overdue spring cleaning. It was a mix of family albums, old letters, and tax documents. As I was sorting through a box of files, I stumbled across an envelope that looked a little too new for the pile. The flap was open, and there was a single sheet of paper inside. My eyes immediately went to the bold heading at the top, Last Will and Testament. It wasn't the official document, but a rough draft. I had no idea why it was left in the attic, but the timing felt almost too perfect. I flipped it open, expecting to see some mundane details. But instead, what I read made my blood run cold. The first few pages were filled with standard instructions, but then I saw it. The part about the inheritance. My name was barely mentioned. There, right in black and white, was the final decision. It is our desire that the majority of our estate be left to our niece, cousin's name, in recognition of her loyalty and commitment to the family. Your name has always been a source of financial support, but has not shown the same emotional investment or personal dedication. As such, she will not be considered for the primary inheritance of our estate. I couldn't breathe. The document wasn't signed, thank God for that, but it didn't matter. This was the blueprint for the betrayal. The words from the conversation replayed in my head. Loyalty, emotional investment, personal dedication. They had written me off. I wasn't even considered for the inheritance because I had been the one to give them too much. I had been the practical daughter, the one who took care of everything in the background, but not the one to emotionally invest in them the way my cousin did, who, as far as I knew, hadn't done a damn thing. They didn't even see me. My hands shook as I folded the paper back up, stuffing it in my bag. I needed to go somewhere. I needed to confront them once and for all. I didn't waste any time. I drove straight to their house, a mixture of adrenaline and anger coursing through me. The air around me felt thick, as if the universe itself knew I was about to do something that couldn't be undone. When I arrived, the front door was ajar, like they were waiting for me. My heart was pounding, but I walked in without hesitation. "Mom? Dad?" I called, my voice surprisingly steady. They came into the living room, looking more anxious than I had ever seen them. My mom looked like she was about to apologize again, but I didn't let her. "I found it," I said, my voice icy. "The will? The rough draft? I read it." The color drained from their faces. "Sweetheart, My mom started, but I raised a hand, cutting her off. I wasn't here to listen to more excuses. I wasn't here to be gaslit into thinking their decision had been justified. "I don't want to hear it," I said firmly. "I've been the one taking care of you for years. I've been the one who made sure you didn't have to worry about anything, and you're giving everything to her? Why? Because she's a better daughter? Because she's the one who emotionally invested in you? While I was the one paying for your groceries and bills, making sure you weren't cold or hungry, making sure you were comfortable. That was the loyalty you didn't see?" My dad opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His eyes darted from me to my mom, as if they were searching for something, an answer, maybe, or a way out. "You think I don't know what you've been doing?" I continued, my anger escalating with each word. "You've been talking to her, telling her all your problems, asking her for advice, and she's been telling you exactly what you want to hear. You think that makes her better than me? You're giving her everything, and you didn't even see the woman who's been holding you up all this time." I stepped closer, my voice shaking with emotion now. "And then you had the nerve to tell me you were leaving everything to her because of loyalty? You should have thought about that before I stopped writing checks for you. You should have thought about that when I stopped being the person who made sure you didn't fall apart." My mom finally spoke up, her voice thick with tears. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you would understand, that you would see how important it was. I did see. I saw exactly what you were doing, and I don't know why it took me so long to realize it, but I'm done." There was a long, tense silence. My mom was crying now, her shoulders trembling with the weight of what had happened. My dad's face was pale, like he was seeing the truth for the first time. "And I won't be coming back," I added softly, my voice firm. "Not unless you realize that loyalty isn't about giving everything to the one who pleases you most. It's about respecting the ones who are there for you when it's hard, when it's inconvenient. It's about seeing the ones who sacrifice, who give, who put you first. That's loyalty." My dad finally looked up, meeting my eyes with an expression I'd never seen before: guilt, regret, and something else. I wasn't sure what it was, but it was too late now. The damage had been done. I turned and walked out without another word, the door closing behind me with a finality I knew I couldn't undo. But somehow, in that moment, I felt more free than I had in years. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into their narrow definition of what it meant to be loyal. I had done enough, and now it was their turn to prove they deserved me. The days after I left their house were strange. It was like I had finally stepped out of a fog that had clouded my mind for so long. There was a raw kind of peace in the quiet, a relief in knowing that I had taken control of my life. But there was also an emptiness, a part of me that still wished things could be different, that they could see me for who I was, and not just as someone who handled the practical details of their lives. But at the same time, I was starting to realize something that had been hidden beneath my anger. I didn't need them to see me the way I had always hoped. I just needed to see myself. My phone was silent for a few days. No calls, no texts. At first, I was almost relieved. I wasn't ready to hear the apologies or explanations they would surely try to give. I needed time to let everything settle. But as the days wore on, I could feel a change in the air. There were moments when I would think of them and feel a pang of guilt. After all, they were still my parents. But every time that thought crept up, I reminded myself of what had happened. I reminded myself that they hadn't just let me down, they had taken me for granted. They had chosen my cousin over me without even seeing the sacrifice I had made for them. It was a few days later when the text came through. "We've been talking. We need to see you." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance and protect myself from any further pain. But another part of me, the part that still had love for them, felt a twinge of curiosity. What did they want? What had changed? I went to their house that afternoon, fully expecting them to lay on the guilt trip to beg me to come back into the fold and help them again. But when I walked in, I immediately noticed something different. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, looking more composed than I had seen her in days. My dad was standing by the window, his back to me, as if he were trying to find the words to say. There was no awkwardness, no rush to apologize. It felt different. "Sit down," my mom said, her voice steady but still filled with the weight of everything that had happened. "We've had some time to think." I sat down slowly, my eyes scanning their faces, trying to figure out what they were feeling. They didn't look angry or defensive. They looked tired. And that was the first moment I realized that maybe, just maybe, they had finally understood. "We're sorry," my dad said, his voice raw with emotion. "We've been selfish. We thought we were doing the right thing, but we weren't seeing you. We weren't seeing what you've done for us." My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't what I had expected. No excuses, no empty apologies, just the truth. "We were wrong," my mom added, her voice shaking slightly. "And I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. You've always been enough. I should have recognized that. I should have seen you for everything you've done. Not just financially, but emotionally, too. You've been there for us in ways we never understood." I sat there, stunned. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to shout at them, to tell them how deeply they had hurt me, to remind them of how they had taken me for granted. But in that moment, all I could feel was a strange mixture of relief and sadness. They had finally seen me, and I didn't know how to respond to that. "You don't have to apologize," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I just needed you to understand. I needed you to see that I wasn't just a safety net, that I wasn't just someone who handled the hard stuff. I needed you to see that I needed you to see me. I'm your daughter, not your backup plan." My dad nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've been selfish, too. I've taken you for granted. We both have. And I know we can't take back what's happened, but I want you to know that we understand now. We know that you've given so much, and we didn't appreciate it, and for that, I'm sorry." I sat there for a long moment, letting the words sink in. I had been holding on to so much hurt, so much anger, that I hadn't known if I would ever be able to forgive them. But in that moment, I felt something shift. It wasn't immediate healing, but it was a step forward. "I'm not going to be the person I was," I said, finally breaking the silence. I'm not going to keep bending over backward for you, and I'm not going to keep supporting you if you don't truly see me. But I'm willing to try again. I want to have a relationship with you, but it can't be the way it was." My mom's face softened. "We'll do better. We promise." We sat there for a while longer, talking, for the first time in a long time, like a family. There were no more promises of immediate change or declarations of how things would be fixed. But there was something in the air, something real, an understanding that had never been there before. After that conversation, things weren't perfect. They didn't magically turn into the family I had always dreamed of, but they did change. I started seeing less of the manipulation from my aunt and more of the genuine effort from my parents to include me in their lives, to value me not just for what I could do for them, but for who I was. And as for me, I was learning to trust again, to let go of the past. I was learning to stand up for myself and set boundaries, to say no when I needed to, and to stop sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. I was learning to value myself, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was enough, not just in their eyes, but in my own. Maybe that's what I had been waiting for all along, to stop looking for their validation and to start finding it within myself. But most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away, not to punish others, but to give them the space to realize their mistakes and for you to find the peace you deserve.